On May 25, 2019, the World Health Organization officially announced that it would include gaming disorders as a behavioral addiction on their international classification of diseases. This should be cause for major concern. According to the Pew Research Center, 97% of teen boys and 83% of teen girls play some kind of video game. Societal norms which are enforced in the real world are forgotten in the virtual reality of a video game. While video games may provide people with an escape from day-to-day life, the problem lays in the content with which video games present to children and the antisocial behavior with which video game play cultivates. Video games are not only addictive, but also have a negative effect on humans, making them more prone to antisocial behavior. So for this presentation, I'm going to talk about the negative effects of video game play and provide some prescriptions on how video game play can be regulated. The cognitive script theory states that children place experiences, interactions, and observations in a sequence of events, much like a story narrative. These scripts are then used as a guideline to solve problems later on in life. The social learning theory expands on this concept, stating that children mimic the behavior of people they admire and also repeat behaviors for which they, the children, are rewarded. These two theories are important to note when talking about the effects of violent video games, because it expresses the fact that people, especially children, learn from active experiences. And it makes sense. If you wanted to learn how to fly, for example, what way do you think would be the most effective? Read a book, watch an instructional DVD, or use a flight simulator. Furthermore, many violent video games directly reward violent behavior by receiving points, or even going as far as saying "nice shot" after killing an enemy. By giving positive reinforcement, this behavior is more likely to be repeated. In short, violent video games not only provide children with the script on how to behave, but encourage the behavior, making the child more susceptible to act out the negative behavior elsewhere. Another problem with playing violent video games, or any type of video game for that matter, is that it promotes a sedentary lifestyle. According to a recent study conducted by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, on average, children and teens spend 6 to 8 hours sitting in front of a TV or playing a video game a day. The same study found that children who sit in front of a TV for more than 3 hours a day are 65% more at risk of being obese than a child who spends an hour or less in front of a TV. What is even more concerning, though, is that these sedentary habits that are developed during childhood and adolescence carry on into adulthood. But perhaps the scariest part of video game play is just how addictive it can be. Studies have shown that video game play releases the same chemicals in the brain that drug and alcohol addicts release when they are around their vice. Video games are so addictive, in fact, that in Japan, there's a whole group of people known as hikikomori who have withdrawn from society completely, spending all their time inside playing video games. So who's to blame? First and foremost, video game companies intentionally make their video games addictive. It is well known that dopamine is released in our brain as a way to reward us for good behavior. Exercise, food, positive reinforcement, social interactions all earn you a dopamine kick. Well, video game designers have found a way to hack this physiological system through a game process called a compulsion loop. Here's how it works. A player gets a task to complete with the promise of a reward at the end. The player then completes the task and gets the reward, resulting in a dopamine kick. The player then gets another task, and the formula repeats. Video game designers have also utilized concepts that are often found in gambling games to keep their participants playing. For example, variable rate enforcement, which is when our brains respond more strongly to uncertain rewards than to certain ones, is often seen in loot boxes in video games. Loot boxes show up in a game map, and you have the opportunity to either win a lot of gold or nothing. This keeps players enticed to keep on button smashing until they achieve some sort of reward. So what can be done? Firstly, and perhaps the easiest way to avoid the negative effects of video game play, is for parents to seriously consider their policy with video games in the household. Parents should be wary. The results are out, and video games are no longer considered to be a benign activity. Instead of purchasing an Xbox for your child as a form of entertainment, consider getting your kid into a productive activity, such as sports, music, or arts. I'm the product of parents that implemented this philosophy, and although I was frustrated at the time, looking back, I'm grateful that this decided to not allow video games in our household. It forced me to find other means of entertainment. and enabled me to put my time into things like music. If your child insists on having a game station, consider setting boundaries. Perhaps your kid is only allowed to play video games that you have approved for only 1 hour a day or during the weekends. However, if you feel as though your child has a legitimate gaming problem, it is important to seek help. According to the World Health Organization, gaming addiction is described as the inability to stop playing even though it interferes with other areas of one's life. Get a professional's opinion, such as a behavioral therapist. There are even gaming addiction clinics, such as Rise Gaming Recovery in Escondido, California, that specialize in gaming addiction treatment. But what baffles my mind the most is the fact that the government hasn't done anything to address this issue. On July 27, 2010, the Supreme Court released the verdict on Schwarzenegger v. Entertainment Merchants Association, a case that addressed whether states have the right to restrict freedom of speech by limiting the sale of violent video games to minors. The judges deemed the censorship to be unconstitutional, stating that this law would infringe on Americans' freedom of press and speech. Since then, the topic of video games regulation has been considered settled law. No more legislation has surrounded the topic, and nothing has been passed. However, I'm hoping that with the new research that has come out, the government will review the topic and make some legislative changes. After all, other addictive substances such as drugs, alcohol, and cigarettes have been regulated. Why is there an exception for video games, especially when one considers that the main demographic of people that play these games are adolescent kids? The last thing that can be done is to educate people about the negative effects of video games. Similar to anti-smoking campaigns in high school, I think it would be a good idea to talk about why video game usage should be restricted and the harms it can cause. It's a simple and effective solution. So in review, today we talked about the negative effects of video games, who it affects, and why it should generate a pause for concern. I've also talked about how it can be regulated and provided 3 different routes to treat the issue. On May 25th, 2019, the World Health Organization officially announced that it would include gaming disorders as a behavioral addiction on their international classification of diseases. Now it's up to us to come up with solutions on how to stop this problem and prevent people from being affected by it.